Imagine walking through an abandoned building and finding what looks like hidden treasure. Not gold, not cash, but something even more fascinating. A mysterious object that glows with a beautiful blue light in the dark. It looks harmless, almost magical. You pick it up, show it to your friends, and take it home. Within days, people around you begin getting sick. Weeks later, doctors discover that the glowing object wasn't treasure at all. It was one of the deadliest radioactive substances ever released into a city. This is the true story of the Goiania Accident, one of history's most shocking nuclear disasters that happened without a single nuclear explosion. It all began in Goiânia, Brazil in September 1987. The city was peaceful, growing, and full of life. Nothing suggested that it was about to become the center of one of the world's worst radiation accidents. Years earlier, a private cancer treatment clinic had moved to a new location. In the old building, one piece of equipment was left behind. It was a radiotherapy machine that had once been used to treat cancer patients. Inside the machine was a tiny capsule containing Cesium-137, an intensely radioactive material capable of destroying cancer cells. The capsule was designed to remain safely sealed inside thick metal shielding. As long as it stayed intact, it posed little danger. But the abandoned clinic became the center of a legal dispute. Ownership of the building was unclear. Security disappeared. The equipment sat forgotten for years. Eventually, curiosity arrived. On September 13th, two scrap metal scavengers entered the abandoned building looking for anything they could sell. Among the rusting equipment, they found the heavy radiotherapy machine. It looked valuable. The machine was too heavy to move all at once, so they spent hours taking it apart. Neither man had any idea what the machine actually was. As they struggled to remove pieces of metal, they unknowingly damaged the protective shielding around the radioactive source. That single decision changed everything. They hauled parts of the machine back to a junkyard. Soon afterward, both men began feeling strangely ill. They suffered headaches, nausea, vomiting. Their skin started burning as though they had severe sunburns. They assumed it was food poisoning or exhaustion from hard labor. Radiation was the last thing anyone imagined. At the junkyard, the owner became fascinated by a small metal capsule recovered from inside the machine. It was unusually heavy. It seemed important. Unable to open it easily, he spent days trying to break it apart. Finally, he succeeded. Inside was a powder unlike anything he had ever seen. In darkness, it emitted a brilliant blue glow. It shimmered like tiny stars. He thought it was beautiful. He had no idea that every second he spent admiring it exposed him to dangerous levels of radiation. Excited by the strange discovery, he showed it to family and friends. People gathered around to watch the glowing powder. Some believed it had supernatural powers. Others simply thought it looked amazing. Pieces of the glowing material were passed from hand to hand. Some people carried tiny fragments home. Children played with it. One little girl sprinkled the glowing dust on her skin because she thought it looked pretty. Another person rubbed it onto clothing. The radioactive contamination spread silently across homes, streets, buses, and workplaces. Unlike smoke, unlike poison, unlike fire, radiation has no smell, no taste, no color, no warning. The people of Goiânia had absolutely no reason to fear what they couldn't see. Over the next several days, hospitals became crowded with patients complaining of mysterious illnesses. Doctors were confused. Entire families developed identical symptoms. Burns appeared without flames. Hair began falling out. People became weak. Some could barely stand. The illnesses didn't resemble any known infectious disease. Medical staff searched for answers, but nothing made sense. Meanwhile, the radioactive powder continued spreading throughout the city. Clothes became contaminated, furniture became contaminated, vehicles became contaminated. Even money exchanged between people carried radioactive particles. One person unknowingly transported contaminated material across the city, exposing countless others along the way. The invisible danger was growing larger every hour. Finally, one family member became suspicious. The junkyard owner's wife believed the strange glowing object was somehow connected to everyone's illness. Despite being seriously sick herself, she placed the mysterious capsule inside a plastic bag and took it to a local health office. It was one of the most important decisions in the entire disaster. At first, nobody understood what they were looking at. Then a physicist tested the object with radiation equipment. The instrument immediately shot to its maximum reading. It wasn't malfunctioning. The radiation levels were so extreme that the detector couldn't properly measure them. The realization spread quickly. The city wasn't facing a disease outbreak. It was facing radioactive contamination. Authorities immediately launched an emergency response. Police blocked roads. Scientists rushed into the city wearing protective suits. Entire neighborhoods were evacuated. Helicopters surveyed contaminated areas. Residents stood in long lines waiting to be scanned for radiation. More than 100,000 people were tested. For many families, the waiting was terrifying. Parents wondered whether their children had been exposed. Neighbors feared one another. No one knew where the radioactive particles had traveled. Special teams searched house after house using sensitive radiation detectors. Some homes produced alarming readings. Furniture had absorbed contamination. Walls had absorbed contamination. Even pets were found carrying radioactive particles. Anything too contaminated had to be removed. Some houses couldn't be cleaned at all. They were demolished. Entire truckloads of soil, furniture, clothing, and personal belongings were sealed inside special containers for safe disposal. People watched as nearly everything they owned disappeared forever. The emotional cost was devastating. Several people died from acute radiation exposure. Many others suffered severe injuries requiring months of medical treatment. Children, adults, and emergency workers all became victims of an accident none of them understood until it was too late. Perhaps the most heartbreaking story was that of the little girl who had played with the glowing powder, believing it was beautiful. She had smiled while covering herself with something that was silently damaging her body. Despite intensive medical care, she did not survive. Her story became one of the lasting symbols of the tragedy. The cleanup operation continued for months. Thousands of tons of contaminated material had to be safely collected and stored. Experts monitored radiation levels across the city, ensuring no dangerous hotspots remained. Although Goiania eventually recovered, the disaster left permanent scars. Many survivors experienced long-term health problems. Others faced discrimination simply because people feared they might still carry radiation. Businesses struggled. Families relocated. Trust was shattered. Investigations later concluded that multiple failures had allowed the tragedy to happen. Dangerous medical equipment had been abandoned. Security was inadequate. Warnings were missing. A highly radioactive source had been left vulnerable in an empty building. The accident transformed how many countries handled radioactive materials. Stricter regulations were introduced. Medical equipment tracking improved. Emergency response procedures became far more organized. The Goiania accident remains one of the clearest examples of how something invisible can become unimaginably dangerous when safety systems fail. There was no mushroom cloud, no nuclear reactor explosion, no military attack, just curiosity, a forgotten machine, a glowing blue light, and a city that unknowingly welcomed one of the most dangerous substances on Earth into homes, schools, and neighborhoods. The tragedy reminds us that some of history's greatest disasters didn't begin with panic. They began with ordinary people making ordinary decisions without knowing the invisible danger that stood right in front of them. Sometimes, the deadliest thing you'll ever encounter isn't the thing that looks the most frightening. Sometimes, it glows beautifully in the dark.